10 years ago, a 23-year-old woman in Palm Harbor, Florida, vanished on a stormy summer evening, disappearing without a trace, leaving her family devastated and the community paralyzed with fear. Authorities initially suspected her boyfriend and several acquaintances, but found neither her body nor the blue sedan she drove that night, causing the investigation to quickly run cold. Yet for 10 long years, her mother refused to give up, keeping her daughter's bedroom exactly as she left it and a lantern burning in the window every night. Then one morning, a routine dredging operation in the marshlands uncovered something that would change everything, a discovery that would reopen the case and rock the Palm Harbor community to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the summer of 2012, Palm Harbor nestled along Florida's Gulf Coast, where humid air hung heavy over swaying palm trees and afternoon thunderstorms swept across the sky with clockwork precision. Residents found relief from the heat in backyard pools, at crowded beaches, or in air-conditioned cafes and shopping malls scattered throughout the coastal town. In this tropical paradise, Sofia Rivera, a 23-year-old nursing student, represented the brightest hopes of her Cuban-American family. The first to attend college, she balanced her studies with a part-time job at Memorial Hospital. Her schedule packed, but her energy boundless. Friends described her as having an infectious laugh that would fill a room, always ready with encouragement for others, even when exhausted from overnight clinical rotations. On the evening of August 3rd, Sofia dressed in a pale blue sundress for her friend Megan's birthday celebration at Bayshore Lounge. String lights crisscrossed the outdoor patio, where reggae music mingled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. As midnight approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising one of Florida's notorious summer storms. Around 11:30 p.m., Sofia hugged her friends goodbye, declining offers to stay longer or get a ride home. "I need to review my notes before tomorrow's exam," she explained, twirling her car keys around her finger. Security cameras later showed her walking across the dimly lit parking lot to her blue Honda Civic, the wind beginning to toss her long, dark hair as the approaching storm sent palm fronds scraping against the asphalt. At her modest family home 10 minutes away, her mother Carmen sat in the kitchen, unable to sleep as thunder rumbled in the distance. She had always waited up for her daughter, a tradition that began when Sofia first started driving. The clock on the microwave blinked past midnight, then 12:30, then 1 a.m. Outside, rain pounded against the windows, transforming the streets into shallow rivers. By 2 a.m., Carmen's concern evolved into raw fear. She called Sofia's cell phone repeatedly, each attempt directing her straight to voicemail. She phoned the hospital, thinking perhaps her daughter had been called in for an emergency shift, then tried Megan, who confirmed Sofia had left the party hours earlier. At 3:45 a.m., with the storm still raging, Carmen woke her husband Miguel and their son Daniel. By 4 a.m., Daniel was driving through flooded streets searching for his sister or any sign of her blue Honda. At 7 a.m., as the storm cleared and sunrise painted the sky in watercolor hues, Carmen called the Palm Harbor Police Department to report her daughter missing. From that moment, the Rivera family's world collapsed into a nightmare from which they couldn't wake. Within hours, the Palm Harbor Police launched what would become the largest search operation in the town's history. Detective Thomas Walsh, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and 20 years of experience, took the lead. "Time is critical in these situations," he told reporters at the first press conference. "Every hour that passes means evidence could be lost or compromised." Patrol cars combed every street in Palm Harbor. Marine units searched the coastline, mindful that the storm had created dangerous rip currents that night. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors chopping through the humid air as they scanned the landscape for any sign of Sofia or her blue Honda. The community mobilized in ways Palm Harbor had never seen before. Hundreds of volunteers assembled at the high school parking lot, forming search parties that fanned out through parks, nature preserves, and commercial areas. Local businesses donated bottled water, food, and supplies for the searchers. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils, their pews filled with people who knew Sophia and many who didn't, but felt compelled to help. Despite the massive effort, Sophia seemed to have vanished without a trace. No one reported seeing her blue Honda after she left the Bayshore Lounge. Her credit cards remained unused, her phone silent. The only potential lead came from a gas station's security camera half a mile from the lounge, which captured a blue sedan similar to Sophia's driving through the rain at approximately 11:45 p.m. The image was too grainy to identify the driver or license plate. As the first week passed without results, Detective Walsh turned his attention to the people closest to Sophia. Her boyfriend, Jason Miller, a pharmaceutical sales representative, underwent multiple interrogations. Witnesses confirmed he was at a conference in Tampa the night Sophia disappeared, and hotel security footage showed him entering his room at 10:30 p.m. and not leaving until morning. Next came Sophia's classmates and co-workers. A nursing student, Trevor Collins, had reportedly asked Sophia out several times, despite her polite rejections. His alibi, playing video games alone in his apartment, couldn't be verified. Co-workers at Memorial Hospital mentioned tensions between Sophia and an older nurse who felt threatened by the younger woman's competence and popularity with patients. Every lead was pursued, every story checked, but none provided the breakthrough the investigation desperately needed. After 3 weeks, the search was scaled back. Volunteers dwindled. News coverage shifted to other stories. For the first time, Detective Walsh used the phrase "cold case" in a private briefing with the Rivera family. Carmen refused to accept this. "My daughter is out there," she insisted, her voice breaking but her resolve unshakable. Someone knows what happened to her. The Rivera home became a shrine to the missing young woman. Sophia's bedroom remained untouched. Nursing textbooks stacked on her desk, a half-finished cup of tea permanently stationed on her nightstand, as if she might return at any moment to finish it. Carmen placed a battery-operated lantern in Sophia's window, vowing it would burn every night until her daughter came home. Miguel channeled his grief into action, taking time off from his construction job to distribute flyers throughout neighboring towns. Daniel, struggling with the sudden hole in his life where his sister had been, started a website dedicated to finding Sophia, regularly updating it with any information he could gather. As months turned into seasons, Palm Harbor adjusted to life with this open wound. Children were no longer allowed to play outside unsupervised. Young women traveled in groups. The Bayshore Lounge, once a popular gathering spot, saw its business decline as people avoided the place now associated with Sophia's disappearance. On the 1-year anniversary, the Rivera family organized a candlelight vigil at the town park. Hundreds attended, standing silently as the sun set, their flames creating a constellation of light against the growing darkness. Detective Walsh stood at the back, his face lined with the weight of the unsolved case. When asked by a reporter if the investigation was still active, he replied simply, "It never stopped." By 2015, Sophia's case had joined the ranks of America's thousands of unsolved disappearances. The Rivera family continued their rituals. The lantern in the window, the annual vigil, the website maintained with religious dedication. They granted occasional interviews with true crime podcasts and TV shows, hoping exposure might jar someone's memory or conscience. Carmen's health began to deteriorate, the stress and grief manifesting in physical symptoms. Miguel's hair turned completely white, and deep lines etched themselves around his eyes. Daniel, once planning to follow his sister into healthcare, abandoned those dreams, instead taking a job that allowed him to work from home and help care for his increasingly fragile mother. Detective Walsh kept the file on his desk, even as other cases demanded his attention. Sometimes, in quiet moments between active investigations, he would open it, reviewing the timeline, the interviews, the search areas, looking for anything they might have missed. "Sophia Rivera," he would murmur to himself. I haven't forgotten you. In late 2018, Palm Harbor Police Department modernized their cold case procedures, digitizing old files and implementing new software that could identify patterns or connections previously overlooked. Sophia's case was among the first to receive this treatment. While the technology provided better organization, it yielded no new leads. By 2020, even the most dedicated supporters began to lose hope. The annual vigil drew fewer participants. The website received less traffic. Only Carmen remained unwaveringly committed, still changing the batteries in the lantern every week, still keeping Sophia's room exactly as it had been on that August evening in 2012. Then in March 2022, everything changed. A county maintenance crew was dredging a section of Willow Creek, a marshy area about 4 miles from where Sophia was last seen. The creek fed into a larger waterway and had been partially rerouted years earlier for flood control. The area had become overgrown and neglected, requiring clearing to prevent future flooding. As the excavator pulled up a section of mud and vegetation, the operator spotted something unusual, a glint of metal beneath the muck. Shutting down his machine, he climbed down to investigate and found himself staring at what appeared to be the roof of a car. Within hours, the area transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the approach to the creek. Police vehicles lined the narrow access road. A specialized recovery team arrived to extract what was soon confirmed to be a blue Honda Civic, its license plate matching Sofia Rivera's vehicle. News spread through Palm Harbor like wildfire. Residents gathered behind the police barriers, watching in stunned silence as the car was slowly winched from its watery grave. 10 years of submersion had taken its toll. Windows clouded with algae, once blue paint, now a mottled grey-green, mud filling every crevice. When the car was finally on solid ground, Detective Walsh, now the department's senior investigator, approached with the careful reverence of someone entering sacred ground. The door, jammed with silt, required special tools to open. As it creaked back, the crowd held its collective breath. Inside, they found what they had feared for a decade: human remains, preserved by the unique conditions of the marsh, still secured by a seatbelt. A blue sundress, faded but recognizable. A purse containing a hospital ID badge with Sofia Rivera's smiling face. Within days, dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. After 10 years, Sofia had finally been found. But this discovery, while providing some closure, opened a torrent of new questions. How did her car end up in Willow Creek, in an area that had been searched multiple times in 2012? Was it an accident, the result of the violent storm that night, or was something more sinister at play? Forensic specialists meticulously processed the vehicle, fighting against the damage caused by years of submersion. Despite the challenges, they made a crucial discovery: a small trace of foreign DNA preserved in the car's interior. The sample, sent to the state lab for analysis, would spark a chain of events that would shock Palm Harbor to its core. Carmen received the news of her daughter's discovery with a complex mix of emotions, devastating confirmation of her worst fears, alongside the smallest measure of relief that Sofia had finally been found. The lantern in the window, having served its purpose, was extinguished for the first time in a decade, but Carmen immediately replaced it with a different light, a small electric candle that would burn for Sofia forever. "Now, we need justice," she told Detective Walsh, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Whoever did this has walked free for 10 years, no more." A special investigative unit was formed, dedicated solely to determining what happened to Sofia Rivera. Headed by Detective Walsh, and including younger officers with fresh perspectives, the team revisited every aspect of the original investigation, armed with new forensic technologies and the physical evidence finally recovered from Willow Creek. The most promising lead came from the DNA sample found in Sofia's car. Though degraded, advanced techniques allowed scientists to extract enough genetic information to create a profile. When run through the national database, it didn't provide an immediate match. However, investigators turned to genetic genealogy, a technique that had solved numerous cold cases in recent years by identifying distant relatives of unknown subjects. This approach yielded results. The DNA shared markers with several individuals in the database, allowing geneticists to construct a family tree of potential relatives. Through a process of elimination, investigators narrowed their focus to residents of Central Florida, then to Palm Harbor specifically. Meanwhile, engineers studied the location where Sophia's car was found. Willow Creek's current wasn't strong enough to have carried the vehicle to that spot, especially given its position wedged between cypress roots. The car appeared to have been deliberately placed there, in an area that would eventually be overgrown and forgotten. The team re-interviewed everyone connected to the original case. Some had moved away from Palm Harbor. Others had started new families, new careers, new lives. Many expressed shock that the case had been revived, that Sophia Rivera, a name some had tried to forget, was once again the talk of the town. Among those re-interviewed was Dr. Nathan Harris, who in 2012 had been a resident at Memorial Hospital where Sophia worked part-time. Now, the hospital's respected chief of emergency medicine, Dr. Harris, had been briefly considered during the original investigation because of rumors he'd shown special interest in Sophia. However, with multiple colleagues vouching for his whereabouts, the night she disappeared, he'd been quickly cleared. When investigators revisited Dr. Harris, they found a man who had seemingly built a perfect life, married to a pediatrician, father of twin boys, homeowner in Palm Harbor's most prestigious neighborhood, regular donor to community causes. He expressed appropriate sympathy about Sophia's discovery, but maintained the professional distance of someone who had only known her as a casual workplace acquaintance. But as the genetic genealogy results narrowed, a stunning connection emerged. One branch of the family tree constructed from the DNA in Sophia's car led to Dr. Harris's maternal cousins. Further investigation revealed he had changed his name after medical school, legally switching from Nathan Harrison to Nathan Harris for what he claimed were professional reasons. This discovery led to a warrant for Dr. Harris's DNA. His initial reluctance to provide a sample raised immediate red flags. When finally compelled by court order, the results were definitive. A perfect match to the DNA found in Sophia's car. Confronted with this evidence, the carefully constructed facade of Dr. Nathan Harris began to crumble. Surveillance was established on his movements as investigators dug deeper into his past. They discovered concerning patterns, complaints from female staff at previous hospitals where he'd worked, unexplained relocations, gaps in his employment history that coincided with similar missing persons cases in other states. Most damning was a journal recovered from a storage unit rented under his birth name. In it, detailed entries described an obsession with Sophia Rivera that had begun when she started working at Memorial Hospital. The final entry, dated August 3rd, 2012, contained 4 chilling words. She said no, forever. With mounting evidence and concerns that Dr. Harris might flee, Palm Harbor police prepared to make an arrest. They chose their moment carefully, waiting until he finished his shift at the hospital to avoid any potential hostage situation. As he walked to his luxury SUV in the physician's parking lot, officers approached from all directions, their lights bathing the scene in alternating red and blue. "Dr. Nathan Harris," Detective Walsh announced, "you are under arrest for the murder of Sophia Rivera." The man, who had spent a decade building his reputation in Palm Harbor, didn't resist. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his expression remained eerily calm, almost relieved. Witnesses later described it as the face of someone whose long-running performance had finally ended. Word of Dr. Harris's arrest spread through Palm Harbor with shocking speed. Hospital staff watched in disbelief as the respected physician was escorted to a police cruiser. Patients who had trusted him with their lives struggled to reconcile. The compassionate doctor they knew with the monster now described in news reports. For the Rivera family, the arrest brought a complex wave of emotions. The revelation that Sophia's killer had been hiding in plain sight, practicing medicine, saving lives, raising children, while they suffered through years of uncertainty, was almost too much to bear. Yet within their pain burned a fierce determination to see justice finally served. As Palm Harbor grappled with the arrest of one of its most prominent citizens, investigators worked to piece together what had happened that stormy night in August 2012. Based on evidence and later partial confessions, they constructed a timeline. Sophia had left the Bayshore Lounge at 11:30 p.m., as her friends reported. Unknown to her, Dr. Harris, then a hospital resident, who had developed an obsession with a young nursing student, had been watching the party from his car. When she rejected his advances in the parking lot, a confrontation ensued. The approaching storm provided cover for the struggle. Dr. Harris forced Sophia into her own car and drove to a secluded area near Willow Creek. What happened next would only be fully revealed during the trial, but the evidence suggested Sophia fought fiercely for her life before her car was pushed into the marsh, where rising waters from the storm would soon conceal it. In the decade that followed, as the Rivera family searched desperately for their daughter, Dr. Harris built his career at the very hospital where Sophia had worked. He attended community events, treated patients, even donated to the scholarship fund established in Sophia's memory, all while knowing exactly where she was and what he had done. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As news of Dr. Nathan Harris's arrest exploded across Palm Harbor, the community that had once mourned Sophia Rivera now found itself grappling with a new kind of shock. The man they had trusted with their health, their children, and their lives stood accused of a murder that had haunted the town for a decade. Outside the county courthouse, reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the entrance, where Dr. Harris would soon appear for his arraignment. Leading the prosecution was District Attorney Valerie Mendez, a veteran prosecutor with 25 years of experience and a reputation for unwavering determination. With her sleek black suit and steel-rimmed glasses, she projected an image of absolute certainty as she addressed the waiting press. The state of Florida is fully committed to securing justice for Sophia Rivera and her family. The evidence we have gathered is substantial and compelling. Inside the Rivera home, Carmen sat with her husband and son, watching the news coverage with tear-streaked faces. The sight of Dr. Harris in handcuffs, escorted by officers into the courthouse, brought a complex wave of emotions. "I saw him once," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. 3 years ago in the grocery store. He smiled at me. He knew all along where my daughter was, and he smiled at me." Miguel placed his weathered hand over hers, his eyes fixed on the television. "Now everyone will know what he did. Sophia will have justice." At Palm Harbor Memorial Hospital, an emergency board meeting convened to address the crisis. Dr. Harris was immediately suspended, his name removed from the website, his office locked and sealed. Patients scheduled with him were reassigned to other physicians. Staff members huddled in break rooms and hallways, struggling to reconcile the respected colleague they thought they knew with the monster now described in news reports. "He was always so calm, so controlled," one nurse commented, shaking her head in disbelief. "I worked with him for 7 years. I trusted him with my own mother's care." Another staff member recalled, "There was something about him that always seemed a little off. Too perfect, you know, like he was playing a role." That observation would prove more insightful than anyone realized at the time. As investigators dug deeper into Dr. Harris's past, they discovered a disturbing pattern hidden beneath his carefully crafted facade. Born Nathan Harrison in a small Ohio town, he had exhibited troubling behaviors since adolescence. Former classmates, tracked down by detectives, described him as brilliant but distant, obsessive about certain female students who rarely returned his interest. During his undergraduate years at University of Michigan, 2 female students filed complaints about his persistent, unwanted attention, though no charges were ever filed. After medical school at Johns Hopkins, he completed residencies at 3 different hospitals in 3 different states, each transfer occurring shortly after vague, personal conflicts with colleagues. The name change occurred in 2013, just months after Sophia's disappearance, when he legally became Nathan Harris before accepting the position at Palm Harbor Memorial. What had once seemed like a simple professional decision now appeared calculated to distance himself from his past and the crime he had committed. Most disturbing was the discovery that Sofia Rivera wasn't his first obsession. In each city where he had worked, investigators identified young women, usually healthcare workers or students, who had reported uncomfortable interactions with him. Most had dismissed these as merely awkward social encounters from a colleague with poor boundaries. In light of Sophia's murder, these incidents took on a more sinister cast. For Detective Thomas Walsh, who had carried Sophia's case for 10 years, the revelations brought a mix of vindication and regret. "He was here all along," Walsh said during a private briefing with the Rivera family. "Living among us, building a career, starting a family, all while knowing exactly what happened to Sophia." The veteran detective's voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotional toll of the case. "I'm sorry we didn't find him sooner." Carmen, who had aged beyond her years during the decade-long ordeal, reached across the table to grasp Walsh's hand. "You never gave up," she said simply. "That's what matters." The cold case team established a dedicated workspace at the police station, walls covered with timelines, photographs, and evidence logs. At its center hung a portrait of Sophia, not the missing person photo that had circulated for years, but a vibrant image of her laughing with friends, full of life and promise. This was what had been stolen from her family, from the world. Forensic specialists worked around the clock processing evidence from Sophia's recovered car. Despite the challenges posed by a decade underwater, they made remarkable discoveries. Bibers matching a jacket Dr. Harris had been photographed wearing in 2012 were found trapped in the driver's side door. Paint traces on the vehicle's rear bumper suggested it had been pushed into the marsh by another car. Most damning was the journal recovered from Harris's storage unit. Written in meticulous handwriting, it documented his growing fixation on Sophia over several months in 2012. Early entries described casual observations, seeing her in the hospital cafeteria, noting her schedule, admiring her interactions with patients. As time progressed, the entries became more intimate, more intrusive, detailing conversations she would have had no reason to remember, and movements that could only have been observed through deliberate stalking. The final entries revealed a man whose fantasy world was crumbling as reality intruded. "She doesn't understand what we could be together," one passage read. "She looks right through me, treats me like any other resident. She'll see eventually." Then, the night before her disappearance, asked her to meet me after her shift. She said she was busy, always excuses. And finally, the entry dated August 3rd, 2012, "She said no forever." Those 4 words, stark on the page, sent chills through everyone who read them. They represented the moment when Harris's fantasy collapsed and his obsession turned deadly. While the legal case against Dr. Harris took shape, Palm Harbor struggled with collective trauma and guilt. How had they failed to see the predator in their midst? How had a killer been elevated to a position of respect and authority in the very community he had wounded so deeply? Churches and community centers organized support groups for those grappling with these questions. Hospital staff, especially those who had worked closely with Dr. Harris, sought counseling to process their complicated feelings of betrayal and complicity. Parents struggled to explain to their children how someone trusted to heal could also cause such harm. The Harris family faced their own nightmare. His wife, Dr. Emily Harris, a pediatrician with an impeccable reputation, filed for divorce immediately after his arrest. She took their twin boys, now 8 years old, and disappeared from public view, staying with relatives while changing their last name to protect the children from their father's infamy. Friends reported she had no indication of her husband's true nature, describing their marriage as outwardly perfect but emotionally distant. As the case moved toward trial, Harris's defense team worked to create reasonable doubt. They suggested the DNA evidence had been compromised by years underwater. They pointed to gaps in the chain of custody for the recovered journal. They highlighted the lack of eyewitnesses, placing Harris with Sophia on the night she disappeared. Most controversially, they floated an alternative theory, that Sophia had rejected Harris's advances but left the party alive, only to have a tragic accident in the storm, driving into the marsh herself. The journal, they claimed, showed inappropriate fixation but not murderous intent. The prosecution, led by D.A. Mendez, methodically dismantled these arguments. Engineering experts testified that the car's position in Willow Creek could not have resulted from an accidental drive-off. Forensic analysis showed damage consistent with the vehicle being pushed into the water, and the DNA evidence, despite challenging conditions, met all scientific standards for a positive match. The defendant spent 10 years perfecting his mask, Mendez told journalists outside the courthouse. But science doesn't lie, evidence doesn't lie, and DNA doesn't lie. 3 months after his arrest, Dr. Nathan Harris's trial began. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity, with a line of spectators stretching around the block. News vans from national networks crowded the street, their satellite dishes raised like metallic flowers tracking the sun. This case, with its decade-long mystery, respected doctor-turned-murderer, and grieving families' long wait for justice, had captured attention far beyond Florida's borders. Inside the courtroom, the Rivera family occupied the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. Carmen, Miguel, and Daniel sat shoulder to shoulder, a united front after 10 years of shared suffering. Across the aisle, the gallery remained conspicuously empty, where the defendant's family or supporters would typically sit. Dr. Harris had become a pariah, abandoned by all who once claimed to know him. When Harris entered in a grey suit rather than prison orange, a right afforded to defendants not yet convicted, an audible murmur ran through the courtroom. He walked with the same confident posture he had displayed in hospital corridors, his expression neutral, almost clinical in its detachment. Only when his eyes briefly met Carmen Rivera's did a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps fear, cross his face. Judge Elaine Brannigan, a veteran jurist known for running an efficient courtroom, set the tone immediately. "This case has generated significant public interest," she addressed the packed gallery. "But inside these walls, only evidence and the rule of law matter. I will not tolerate outbursts or attempts to influence these proceedings." Her gavel punctuated the warning with a sharp crack. The trial began with opening statements. Prosecutor Mendez approached the jury, her voice calm but resonating with conviction. 10 years ago, Sophia Rivera drove away from a birthday celebration and disappeared into the night. For a decade, her family lived in agony, not knowing what happened to their beloved daughter and sister. She gestured to the Rivera family. "Today, we begin the process of answering the questions that have haunted them and this community for far too long." Defense attorney James Moretti, a high-priced lawyer from Miami known for handling difficult cases, presented a different narrative. "This case is about a rush to judgment," he told the jury. "The prosecution has constructed an elaborate story based on circumstantial evidence and a community's need for closure. But Dr. Nathan Harris is innocent of this crime, and we will demonstrate that the evidence does not support the serious charges against him." Over the following days, the prosecution methodically built its case. Forensic experts explained how Sophia's car had been recovered and the significance of finding Dr. Harris's DNA inside. Engineers demonstrated why the vehicle's position in Willow Creek indicated deliberate placement rather than an accident. Former colleagues from the hospital testified about Harris's unusual interest in Sophia, which many had dismissed as harmless at the time. Most powerful was the testimony of Sophia's friends, who described the vibrant, ambitious young woman whose life had been cut short. Megan, who had hosted the birthday party the night Sophia disappeared, broke down on the stand while recounting their final conversation. She was excited about finishing nursing school, Megan said through tears. She had her whole life planned out. Throughout it all, Harris sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his attorney but showing little reaction to the testimony against him. His detachment struck many observers as chilling, further evidence, they whispered, of his guilt. The defense fought back, highlighting inconsistencies in witness statements and questioning the reliability of evidence that had spent years underwater. They brought in their own experts, who suggested alternative explanations for the forensic findings. They emphasized that no one had witnessed an altercation between Harris and Sophia on the night of her disappearance. But their case suffered a devastating blow when D.A. Mendez introduced the journal. As passages were read aloud to the hushed courtroom, Harris's inner world was exposed, his growing obsession, his sense of entitlement to Sophia's attention, his anger at her rejection. The clinical detachment that had defined his demeanor throughout the trial finally cracked when the final entry was read. She said no forever. For the first time, jurors saw emotion from the defendant, a flush of color in his cheeks, a tightening of his jaw, a brief closing of his eyes, as if he couldn't bear to hear his own words spoken aloud. That moment, many would later say, was when conviction became inevitable. After 8 days of testimony, both sides presented their closing arguments. Defense attorney Moretti urged the jury to separate emotion from fact, to remember that circumstantial evidence alone should not send a man to prison for life. "You may not like Dr. Harris," he concluded. "You may find his private thoughts disturbing, but that doesn't make him a murderer." Prosecutor Mendez, standing directly in front of the jury box, delivered her final words with quiet intensity. "Sophia Rivera had dreams," she said. "She wanted to become a nurse, to help others, to make her family proud. Nathan Harris took all of that away because he couldn't accept one simple word: no. For 10 years, he watched this community search for answers while he built his career on a foundation of lies. The evidence speaks clearly. The time for justice has come." The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before reaching their verdict. As they filed back into the courtroom, their faces solemn, a hush fell over the gallery. Judge Brannigan instructed Harris to rise and face the jury. For the first time since the trial began, a tremor was visible in his hands. "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant Nathan Harris guilty." Carmen Rivera collapsed against her husband, sobbing with relief and grief intermingled. Daniel wrapped his arms around both parents, their family circle tight and protective. Across the courtroom, Harris stood motionless, his facade finally crumbling as officers approached to take him into custody. In a voice barely audible over the courtroom's reaction, he whispered, "I just wanted her to see me." Outside the courthouse, hundreds had gathered to await the verdict. When the news spread through the crowd, a collective release of emotion swept through the onlookers. Some cheered, others cried, many simply embraced those standing beside them. The long nightmare that had gripped Palm Harbor was finally ending. Detective Walsh, standing away from the cameras, felt a decade of weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been delayed but not denied. He watched as the Rivera family emerged from the courthouse, surrounded by their supporters. Carmen, despite her exhaustion, stood straight-backed and dignified, her face bearing the marks of 10 years of suffering, but also the peace that comes with resolution. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Carmen Rivera exercised her right to address the court. Standing at the podium, she faced Harris directly for the first time. "You took my daughter's life," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "You stole her future. For 10 years you walked freely while we lived in hell. But Sophia was stronger than you. Her spirit brought us here today. Justice comes to everyone eventually. Judge Brannigan sentenced Harris to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, the mask of the respected doctor completely gone, he looked older, smaller, diminished by the truth that had finally caught up to him. The case of Sophia Rivera transformed Palm Harbor in profound ways. The hospital established the Sophia Rivera Memorial Scholarship for nursing students, ensuring her dream would live on through others. The police department revamped its missing persons protocols, implementing new procedures that would prevent future cases from going cold. The community, wounded but wiser, committed to being more vigilant, more supportive of one another. For Detective Walsh, the case became a cornerstone of his legacy. In interviews and at police conferences, he emphasized the lesson he had learned: never give up on a victim. Time may pass, evidence may fade, but the truth always leaves a trace. The Rivera family began the long process of healing. They finally held a proper funeral for Sophia, laying her to rest in a sunlit corner of Palm Harbor Cemetery, beneath a headstone that read, "Beloved daughter and sister." Justice found. The lantern that had burned in their window for a decade was donated to the police department's cold case unit, a symbol of hope for other families still waiting for answers. In the aftermath of Dr. Nathan Harris's conviction, Palm Harbor faced the difficult task of rebuilding trust in a community where it had been so profoundly shattered. The trial had exposed not just a murderer, but a systemic failure to recognize warning signs that might have prevented tragedy. For many residents, the most disturbing aspect was how easily Harris had integrated into their lives, becoming a respected figure while harboring such darkness. A town hall meeting was organized at Palm Harbor High School Gymnasium 3 weeks after the sentencing. Hundreds attended, filling the bleachers and spilling onto the basketball court where folding chairs had been hastily arranged. Mayor Gabriela Sanchez opened the proceedings, her usual confident demeanor subdued by the weight of the moment. Palm Harbor has always prided itself on being a community where people look out for each other, she began, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. The Sophia Rivera case has shown us that we must do better. Tonight is about acknowledging our collective grief and finding a path forward. Detective Walsh took the podium next, facing the community he had served for over 2 decades. His silver hair caught the gymnasium lights, the lines in his face deeper than they had been 10 years earlier when he first promised the Rivera family he would find their daughter. Cold cases are never truly cold, Walsh explained, his voice steady but emotional. They're waiting for the right moment, the right technology, or the right piece of evidence to bring them back to life. Sophia's case teaches us that justice may be delayed, but with persistence, it will never be denied. He outlined the changes being implemented in the police department, enhanced training for officers handling missing persons cases, improved coordination with state and federal agencies, and the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit funded by a grant from the state. But his most powerful message was directed at the community itself. Each of you is a detective in your own right, Walsh said, scanning the faces before him. You know when something doesn't feel right in your neighborhood, your workplace, your circle of friends. Trust that instinct. Report concerns, even if they seem minor. The smallest detail might save a life. The microphone was then opened to residents. One by one they approached, sharing memories of Sophia, expressing gratitude for closure and asking difficult questions about how a predator had operated undetected for so long. A nurse who had worked alongside Dr. Harris for years spoke through tears. I keep replaying every interaction, wondering if I missed something, if there was a moment when I could have seen through the facade. Her voice trembled with guilt that many in the room shared. Detective Walsh responded with compassion. Predators like Harris spend their lives perfecting a mask. They become experts at appearing normal, even exemplary. Don't blame yourselves for his deception. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted from grief and guilt toward action. Community watch programs were revitalized. Mental health resources were highlighted. Women's safety initiatives gained immediate support. In tragedy's wake, Palm Harbor was finding its collective strength. At the back of the gymnasium, Carmen and Miguel Rivera sat quietly, observing but not participating. They had said all they needed to say in the courtroom. Tonight was about watching their community begin to heal, just as they were trying to do themselves. After the meeting, a young woman approached them tentatively. She introduced herself as Jessica, a nursing student at the same program Sophia had attended. "I never knew your daughter," she said, "but her story has affected all of us in the program. We've started a safety buddy system for clinical rotations and late-night study sessions. No one walks alone anymore." Carmen embraced the young woman, touched by this tangible legacy of her daughter's life. "Sophia would be proud to know she's still protecting others," she said softly. In the weeks that followed, Palm Harbor Memorial Hospital underwent its own reckoning. The administration faced difficult questions about how Harris had been hired and promoted, despite his history of concerning behavior at previous institutions. An independent review revealed systemic failures in background checks and reference verification. The hospital board appointed Dr. Maria Vasquez, a respected psychiatrist with expertise in predatory behavior, to overhaul their hiring and supervision protocols. Healthcare settings can be particularly vulnerable to individuals who hide behind the respected status of medical professionals, Dr. Vasquez explained at a press conference. "We're implementing changes that will make it much harder for someone like Harris to slip through the cracks." These changes included enhanced background investigations, periodic psychological evaluations for staff, and a formalized system for reporting and tracking concerning behaviors. The hospital also established a patient advocacy office, where concerns could be reported directly, bypassing traditional hierarchies that sometimes suppressed complaints. Most powerfully, the hospital created the Sofia Rivera Memorial Nursing Scholarship, fully funding education for one promising student each year. The inaugural recipient was a young woman from Sofia's old neighborhood, who shared her dream of becoming an emergency room nurse. At the scholarship announcement ceremony, Carmen Rivera presented the award, her hands steady as she passed the certificate to the tearful recipient. "My daughter's hands were meant to heal," Carmen said. "Through you and those who will follow, they still will." Meanwhile, the legal system continued its work. District Attorney Valerie Mendez, whose meticulous prosecution had secured Harris's conviction, began reviewing other unsolved cases in jurisdictions where he had previously lived and worked. The pattern of his behavior suggested Sophia might not have been his first victim, merely the first one to be conclusively tied to him. "Predators like Harris rarely begin with murder," Mendez explained in a meeting with detectives from 3 states. "There's typically an escalation of behavior, a testing of boundaries. We need to look at every unexplained disappearance, every assault, every instance of stalking in areas where he lived." This cross-jurisdictional investigation soon yielded disturbing results. In Cleveland, where Harris had completed his first residency, police reopened the case of a nurse who had disappeared in 2008. Her body had never been found, but her car had been discovered in a remote area of a state park. At the time, investigators had focused on her ex-boyfriend, finding insufficient evidence to charge him, but never pursuing other leads. In Baltimore, where Harris attended medical school, records showed he had been questioned about an incident involving a female classmate who reported being followed home repeatedly. Campus security had dismissed it as a misunderstanding, and the woman eventually transferred to another school. Efforts to locate her were ongoing. Most significantly, in Tampa, just 40 miles from Palm Harbor, a 2011 case involving a pharmacy technician who had reported being stalked before vanishing during a rainstorm showed striking similarities to Sophia's disappearance. Her body had been found months later in a drainage canal, the death ruled accidental, despite suspicious circumstances. Detective Walsh traveled to Tampa to review the evidence personally. "Same pattern," he reported back to DA Mendez. "Young woman in healthcare, stormy night, water involved in concealing the body." And Harris was doing a rotation at Tampa General during that exact time period. These connections transformed the Sofia Rivera case from a singular tragedy to something far more horrifying. The work of a serial predator who had moved methodically through the healthcare system, leaving a trail of victims across multiple states. National media outlets picked up the story, running specials with titles like "The Doctor's Deadly Obsession" and "White Coat, Dark Heart." For families who had lived with unanswered questions about their missing daughters, Harris's identification offered the possibility of resolution. Some traveled to Florida, meeting with the Rivera family and forming an informal support network bound by shared grief and the hope for answers. Beth Anderson, mother of the missing Cleveland nurse, expressed what many felt: even if it brings the worst news, knowing would be better than wondering every day for the rest of my life. 6 months after Harris's conviction for Sofia's murder, prosecutors in Ohio indicted him for the Cleveland nurse's death based on newly analyzed evidence. Fiber evidence from her apartment matched clothing Harris had owned, and cell phone records placed him near the state park where her car was found. Similar investigations were advancing in other jurisdictions. Harris, now serving his life sentence in a maximum security facility, maintained his silence, refusing to cooperate with investigators seeking information about other victims. His ex-wife filed for legal name changes for herself and their children, attempting to build new lives untainted by association with him. She released a single public statement through her attorney: "My heart breaks for the Rivera family and all others affected by Nathan's actions. The man I married never existed." In Palm Harbor, the community continued its healing process. The Bayshore Lounge, where Sofia had spent her final happy evening with friends, installed a small memorial plaque at the entrance, "In memory of Sofia Rivera and all victims of violence. May their stories inspire vigilance and compassion." Umbrain, Willow Creek, where Sofia's car had been submerged for a decade, underwent rehabilitation as part of a community project. Volunteers cleared invasive plants, improved water flow, and planted native species along the banks. A small meditation garden with a bench facing the water provided a quiet space for reflection. The site of tragedy was slowly transforming into a place of peace. Detective Walsh found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker at law enforcement conferences nationwide. His message focused on the importance of cold case work, advances in forensic technology, and the psychological insights gained from the Harris case. "Cold cases aren't just about the past," he would tell his audiences. "They're about preventing future crimes by showing that justice has no expiration date." At one such conference in Chicago, Walsh was approached by a forensic genetic genealogist named Sarah Chen. "Your work on the Rivera case was groundbreaking," she told him. "But I think we can do even more with the techniques you pioneered." Chen explained how advances in DNA technology and expanded genealogical databases were revolutionizing cold case investigations. "We're solving cases from the 1970s and 80s that everyone thought would remain mysteries forever. The message to perpetrators is powerful. You can never truly hide. Time is no longer your ally." Inspired by this conversation, Walsh returned to Palm Harbor with a proposal to expand their cold case unit into a regional resource center. With support from the state and federal grants, the initiative would combine traditional investigative methods with cutting-edge genetic genealogy and artificial intelligence tools that could identify patterns across seemingly unrelated cases. The proposal was approved, and the Southeastern Cold Case Resource Center broke ground in Palm Harbor 18 months after Sofia's case was solved. At the ceremony, Mayor Sanchez spoke about the city's journey. "From tragedy, we have created purpose. From loss, we have built something that will bring answers to families across our region." Carmen and Miguel Rivera stood among the dignitaries at the groundbreaking, no longer the grieving parents waiting desperately for news, but advocates whose experience had helped shape a new approach to justice. Carmen, who had once kept a lantern burning in her window, now saw her daughter's legacy illuminating a much broader darkness. 3 years after Harris's conviction, the Southeastern Cold Case Resource Center achieved its first major breakthrough, identifying the perpetrator in a 1992 kidnapping case that had gone unsolved for over 30 years. The victim, a young woman who had survived the ordeal but whose attacker had never been caught, wept as she received the news. "I never thought this day would come," she told Detective Walsh, who had personally called to inform her. "I've lived looking over my shoulder for 3 decades. Her case represented what the center was designed to accomplish: justice delayed but finally delivered, closure for survivors and families, and the powerful message that accountability would find those who committed violence, no matter how much time had passed." By 2025, Palm Harbor had transformed its identity from a community marked by tragedy to one known for resilience and innovation in pursuit of justice. Tourism had rebounded, new businesses opened, and the hospital had regained public trust under Dr. Vasquez's leadership. The Sofia Rivera Nursing Scholarship had funded its 5th recipient, creating a growing network of healthcare professionals committed to safety and vigilance. On the 10th anniversary of Sofia's discovery in Willow Creek, a special ceremony was held at the meditation garden created there. Carmen and Miguel, now in their 70s, sat surrounded by friends, former investigators, and community members. Daniel, who had married and started a family of his own, stood beside them with his young daughter, named Sophia after the aunt she would never meet. Detective Walsh, now retired but still consulting with the Cold Case Center, addressed the gathering. His once silver hair had turned white, but his eyes remained sharp, his voice strong. 10 years ago, we promised the Rivera family that Sophia's case would change how we pursue justice. Today, we can say that promise has been kept. He detailed the accomplishments: 27 cold cases solved across 4 states, 17 perpetrators behind bars, dozens of families given answers, and countless potential victims protected by removing dangerous individuals from society. But numbers don't tell the real story, Walsh continued. The real story is about a community that refused to forget, a family that never lost hope, and a young woman whose memory now stands for something powerful: the certainty that no matter how long it takes, truth will find its way to the light. Carmen Rivera rose slowly to stand beside him. Once broken by grief, she now carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. "My daughter wanted to heal people," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "That was her dream. Through all of you, through this work, she still does." She gestured to the peaceful creek, the flowering plants, the bench where people came to sit and reflect. This place was meant to hide the truth. Now it stands for bringing truth into the open. That is Sophia's legacy. As twilight descended over Palm Harbor, candles were lit and placed along the water's edge, their flames reflecting in the gentle current. The lights represented not only Sophia and the other victims whose cases had been solved, but those still waiting for justice, a reminder that the work continued. Miguel stepped forward, supporting himself with a cane, to place the first floating lantern on the water's surface. Others followed suit, until dozens of tiny lights drifted along the creek, carrying messages of remembrance and hope written by community members. In the gathering darkness, Detective Walsh stood slightly apart, watching the Rivera family surrounded by friends and well-wishers. From the darkest chapter of their lives, they had helped create something remarkable, a blueprint for turning tragedy into purpose that was now being replicated in communities across the country. The cold case that had haunted Palm Harbor had ultimately changed it for the better, making it more vigilant, more compassionate, more determined to protect its most vulnerable. It had transformed a small Florida town into a symbol of what was possible when people refused to forget. When truth was valued above comfort, when justice was pursued with unwavering commitment, no matter how many years had passed. As the final lantern was placed on the water, Carmen looked up at the emerging stars. In a voice only those closest to her could hear, she whispered, "We kept our promise, Sofia. No one will forget." The Sofia Rivera case represents more than just the solution to a decade-old mystery, or the capture of a predator who hid behind a respected facade. It illuminates fundamental truths about justice, community responsibility, and the human capacity for both evil and extraordinary goodness. First, it demonstrates that justice has no expiration date. While technology and forensic advances played crucial roles in solving Sofia's case, equally important was the refusal of her family and dedicated investigators to let time diminish their determination. In an age of short attention spans and news cycles measured in hours rather than years, the message is powerful. Some commitments must transcend time. Some promises must be kept no matter how long it takes. Second, the case highlights the complex reality of predators who walk among us wearing masks of normalcy and even excellence. Dr. Harris's ability to build a successful career and respected position while harboring his dark secrets raises uncomfortable questions about how we evaluate character. It reminds us that credentials, achievements, and social status cannot substitute for genuine integrity, and that communities must remain vigilant even toward those who appear above suspicion. For American society grappling with questions of safety, trust, and accountability, Palm Harbor's journey offers both caution and hope. Caution in recognizing that systems designed to protect us, healthcare institutions, law enforcement, community networks, can fail without proper safeguards and transparency. Hope in seeing how these same systems can be reformed and strengthened when people commit to learning from tragedy rather than merely moving past it. The Rivera family's transformation from victims awaiting answers to advocates helping others find justice represents the possibility of turning personal pain into public purpose. Their story resonates because it speaks to universal fears: the loss of a loved one, the horror of not knowing their fate, the discovery that evil operated undetected in familiar spaces, while also offering the reassurance that even these darkest experiences can ultimately serve a greater good. In the end, the legacy of Sofia Rivera extends far beyond Palm Harbor. Her name now stands for the proposition that every victim deserves remembrance, every case deserves pursuit, and every community bears responsibility for the safety of its members. Through the Cold Case Resource Center, the scholarship program, and the changed practices in healthcare and law enforcement, a single life tragically cut short continues to save others. For families still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones, Palm Harbor's story offers something precious: the knowledge that resolution is possible even after hope seems lost, that science and dedication can uncover truth buried by time, and that a light kept burning, whether a lantern in a window or the persistent flame of memory, can eventually illuminate the darkness. Beyond the media attention, the public ceremonies, and the institutional reforms sparked by Sofia Rivera's case, quieter transformations were unfolding in the lives of those most closely connected to the tragedy. These personal journeys, less visible but equally profound, represented the true measure of healing in Palm Harbor. Detective Thomas Walsh, now 5 years into retirement, had converted his garage into a small consulting office where he continued to advise law enforcement agencies on cold case methodology. The walls were lined with photographs, not of crime scenes or evidence, but of families who had found answers through his work. Central among them was a candid shot of the Rivera family at Daniel's wedding, Carmen and Miguel beaming as they embraced their son and new daughter-in-law. Walsh's relationship with the Riveras had evolved from professional to deeply personal. He joined them for dinner on holidays and birthdays, had become Uncle Tom to Daniel's children, and regularly visited Miguel, who now resided in an assisted living facility after a stroke limited his mobility. The man who had once delivered the most devastating news to the family had become an integral part of their healing. On a warm Tuesday morning, Walsh's phone rang with a call from Carmen. Her voice, though strained with age, carried unmistakable excitement. "Thomas, have you seen the news? The Tampa case. They found something." Walsh immediately switched on his computer, pulling up the local news website. The headline confirmed Carmen's call. New evidence links Harris to 2011 Tampa murder. Denise. After years of investigation, prosecutors had secured enough forensic evidence to formally charge Dr. Nathan Harris with the murder of Alicia Mendoza, the pharmacy technician, whose death had initially been ruled accidental. "This makes 3 confirmed victims," Walsh said quietly. "Ohio, Tampa, and Sophia. 3 families who finally know," Carmen replied. "That's what matters." Later that week, Walsh drove to the assisted living facility to visit Miguel and share the news in person. At 79, Miguel's body had weakened, but his mind remained sharp, his eyes still carrying the quiet dignity that had sustained him through the darkest days of Sophia's disappearance. Sitting in the facility's garden, surrounded by hibiscus and bougainvillea, Miguel listened intently as Walsh explained the Tampa case developments. When Walsh finished, Miguel nodded slowly, then spoke with measured words. "I think often about forgiveness, Thomas," he said, gazing at a monarch butterfly landing on a nearby flower. "Not for him, never for him, but for myself. The anger, it was eating me from inside for so many years." Walsh waited, sensing Miguel had more to share. "Last night I dreamed of Sophia," Miguel continued, a slight tremor in his voice. "Not as she was when she disappeared, but as she would be now. A woman in her 30s, perhaps with children of her own. In my dream, she told me, 'Papa, you don't have to carry this weight anymore.' And when I woke, I felt something had lifted." Walsh placed his hand on Miguel's shoulder, understanding the profound shift this represented. For years, Miguel had been unable to speak of Sophia without visible pain. This peaceful acceptance marked a new chapter in his grief journey. "The work you've done, what the center has accomplished," Miguel said. "This is how we honor her now, not with anger, but with protecting others." The Southeastern Cold Case Resource Center had indeed evolved beyond its founder's initial vision. What began as a regional initiative now served as a national model, with similar centers established in 12 states. The Palm Harbor facility had expanded to include a training academy, where law enforcement officers learned advanced techniques in cold case investigation, forensic applications, and victim advocacy. Carmen Rivera, despite her 75 years, remained actively involved as the center's family liaison coordinator. Drawing on her own experience, she guided other families through the agonizing wait for answers, helping them balance hope with the emotional self-protection necessary to survive years of uncertainty. On this particular day, Carmen was meeting with a mother from Georgia whose daughter had disappeared 5 years earlier. The woman, Ellen Barnes, had traveled to Palm Harbor after reading about the center's work and desperately seeking help for her daughter's stalled investigation. "Everyone has moved on," Ellen confessed, tears streaming down her face. "The police rarely return my calls anymore. Friends avoid mentioning her name. It's like the world wants to forget she ever existed." Carmen recognized the isolation in the woman's eyes, the same isolation she had experienced during those long years of waiting. She reached across the table to grasp Ellen's hands. "I understand," Carmen said simply, "and I promise you we will not forget your daughter." She outlined the center's approach, a fresh review of evidence by their forensic team, application of new technologies not available when the disappearance occurred, and renewed media attention through their partnerships with national organizations. Most importantly, she offered Ellen something beyond procedural assistance, the understanding of someone who had walked the same painful path. "The hardest part," Carmen explained, "is learning to live in 2 worlds simultaneously, one where you maintain hope and pursue every possible lead, and another where you build enough of a life to sustain yourself through the waiting. I can help you navigate both." By day's end, Ellen left with something she hadn't possessed in years, a concrete plan, and the comfort of knowing her daughter's case would receive expert attention. As they parted, she embraced Carmen tightly. "Thank you for not letting your tragedy define you," she whispered. "It gives me hope that I might find purpose again, too." This transformation, from victim to guide, from broken to healer, represented Carmen's most profound victory over the man who had taken her daughter. Dr. Nathan Harris had sought to destroy, but the Rivera family had instead created. His darkness had ultimately been overwhelmed by their light. At Palm Harbor Memorial Hospital, the changes initiated after Harris's conviction had rippled far beyond mere policy revisions. Under Dr. Maria Vasquez's leadership, the institution had become nationally recognized for its pioneering approach to professional ethics and patient safety. Medical schools sent observers to study their model, and Dr. Vasquez regularly addressed healthcare conferences about creating cultures where warning signs couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The hospital's most innovative program, however, was the Ethics in Practice Fellowship, which paired medical professionals with law enforcement officers and victim advocates for intensive training in recognizing and responding to concerning behaviors in healthcare settings. Fellows examined case studies of medical professionals who had abused their positions, analyzed the institutional factors that enabled misconduct, and developed intervention protocols that balanced due process with patient protection. Dr. Vasquez often began these fellowships by bringing participants to a small conference room where a portrait of Sofia Rivera hung beside photographs of other victims of healthcare predators. "These aren't just cautionary tales," she would tell them. "These were people whose lives mattered and whose deaths or suffering should never have happened. Our work honors them by ensuring others are protected." The fellowship had proven remarkably effective, with graduates identifying concerning patterns of behavior that might otherwise have continued unchecked. In 3 documented cases, early intervention had prevented escalation to potential violence. The program was now being replicated in hospitals nationwide, creating a network of vigilant professionals determined to prevent another Nathan Harris from exploiting the trust inherent in medical settings. In the broader Palm Harbor community, the ripple effects of Sofia's case continued to manifest in unexpected ways. Local high schools had implemented comprehensive programs on healthy relationships, boundaries, and recognizing warning signs of obsessive behavior. College students returning home during breaks volunteered with safety initiatives. Small businesses displayed information about resources for those experiencing stalking or harassment. Most notably, the annual Lantern Festival, inspired by the light Carmen had kept burning in her window, had grown from a small memorial into a regional event drawing thousands. Each year on August 3rd, the anniversary of Sofia's disappearance, participants gathered at dusk along the shores of Palm Harbor's beach. They carried handmade lanterns representing both those lost to violence and hopes for a safer future. The festival combined commemoration with education, featuring speakers on personal safety, technological resources for protection, and community responsibility. Its message transcended the specific tragedy that had inspired it, becoming a broader statement about refusing to let fear restrict lives while simultaneously promoting vigilance and mutual protection. Daniel Rivera served as the festival's chief organizer, channeling the organizational skills he had developed during those years of maintaining websites and distributing flyers in search of his sister. Now 41, with 2 children of his own, he had found ways to incorporate Sofia's memory into his family's life without allowing grief to overshadow their joy. His daughter, 11-year-old Sofia, knew the aunt for whom she was named through family stories that emphasized her kindness, ambition, and courage rather than the circumstances of her death. Young Sofia had recently announced her intention to become a detective like Uncle Tom, a career choice that brought both smiles and tears to her family. Daniel's son, Miguel Jr., at 9 years old, was passionate about medicine, a fact that had initially troubled his parents given the family's history with a doctor who betrayed his oath. But their perspective shifted when the boy explained his reasoning. "I want to help people like Grandma says Aunt Sophia wanted to. And I want to be one of the good doctors who protect people." This ability to reclaim what Harris had attempted to taint, medicine as a healing profession, community as a source of safety, trust as the foundation of human connection, represented the most profound aspect of Palm Harbor's recovery. The town had refused to let tragedy define it or fear govern it, instead using painful lessons to build something stronger and more vigilant than what had existed before. Yet amid these positive developments, the criminal justice system continued its work processing the full extent of Harris's crimes. The Tampa case had moved to trial, with prosecutors building on the successful strategy employed in Sophia's case. Meanwhile, investigations in Cleveland and Baltimore advanced, each jurisdiction piecing together evidence spanning decades. Harris himself had retreated into near-total silence within the prison system, refusing most visitors and declining to cooperate with investigators seeking information about additional victims. His ex-wife and children had relocated to the Pacific Northwest, changing their names and starting over far from the shadows of his crimes. The one person Harris had agreed to meet was a forensic psychiatrist conducting research on healthcare professionals who became predators. Their sessions, conducted under strict security protocols, offered limited insight into his psychology. The psychiatrist's published findings, with Harris's identity protected by research ethics, described the individual with profound narcissism, inability to process rejection, and a complete absence of empathy, masked by exceptional social mimicry skills. This clinical assessment offered cold comfort to those seeking to understand how someone could present such a convincing facade of normalcy while harboring such darkness. Yet it provided valuable information for training those who might identify future predators before they could cause harm. For Detective Walsh, the continuing investigations into Harris's past represented unfinished business that prevented full closure. Each new case that emerged confirmed his suspicion that they had caught a serial offender who might otherwise have continued indefinitely, yet also underscored how many years Harris had operated undetected. On a humid Friday afternoon, Walsh received an unexpected visitor at his consulting office. Megan Thompson, the friend who had hosted the birthday party the night Sophia disappeared, had recently returned to Palm Harbor after years living out of state. Now, in her mid-30s, she had maintained regular contact with the Rivera family, but had never spoken directly with Walsh since her testimony at the trial. "I've been meaning to come by since I moved back," she explained, settling into a chair across from his desk. "There's something I need to tell you, something I never mentioned during the investigation." Walsh leaned forward, instantly alert. Even after all these years, new information about the case commanded his full attention. "The night Sophia disappeared," Megan continued, "she mentioned that someone from the hospital had been making her uncomfortable. She didn't use Harris's name. I don't think she even knew it then. She just referred to him as that resident with the intense stare." She laughed it off, said she was probably overreacting. "Why didn't you tell us this back then?" Walsh asked, keeping his tone neutral despite the surge of emotion her revelation triggered. Megan's eyes filled with tears. "By the time I remembered the conversation, you had already arrested Harris. The trial was underway. I told myself it wouldn't change anything, that you had your man. But recently, with the Tampa case in the news, I've been having nightmares about it, about whether things might have been different if I'd mentioned it sooner." Walsh considered her words carefully before responding. Throughout his career, he had encountered countless if-onlys, the torturous hypotheticals that haunted those connected to tragic cases. He knew their destructive power. "Megan, listen to me," he said gently but firmly. Harris was a skilled manipulator who fooled an entire hospital of medical professionals. Even if you had mentioned Sophia's comment, it likely wouldn't have changed the investigation's course at that time. We were focused on her ex-boyfriend, on random predators, not on a respected medical resident. He continued, "What matters is that justice was eventually served. What matters even more is what we've all done since, how this community has transformed tragedy into protection for others. That's the legacy Sophia would want." As Megan left, visibly relieved by their conversation, Walsh reflected on how many similar burdens of guilt were likely carried by others in Palm Harbor. Small moments of concern not voiced. Observations dismissed as insignificant, patterns recognized only in hindsight. Part of the community's healing involved releasing these burdens, understanding that responsibility lay with the perpetrator and the systems that failed to detect him, not with individuals who lacked the context to connect scattered dots. This perspective informed the educational materials developed by the Cold Case Center, which emphasized that while vigilance was essential, perfectionism about prevention could become its own form of victimization. "We learn from the past," Walsh often said in his presentations, "but we cannot be held hostage by it." As the 10th anniversary of Harris's conviction approached, Palm Harbor prepared for a different kind of commemoration than in previous years. Rather than focusing on the tragedy itself, the community planned a celebration of what had been built in its aftermath. The Cold Case Center, the hospital's safety programs, the educational initiatives, and most importantly, the lives that had been saved through these efforts. Carmen Rivera, working with city officials and center staff, envisioned an event that would honor not just Sophia's memory, but the resilience of all survivors and families affected by similar crimes. "We've spent many years looking back," she explained to the planning committee. "Now it's time to more fully embrace looking forward." The resulting Pathways to Protection Symposium brought together experts from law enforcement, healthcare, education, and victim advocacy for a 3-day conference held at Palm Harbor's Convention Center. Participants from across the country shared best practices, research findings, and personal testimonies about transforming traumatic experiences into systemic improvements. On the symposium's final evening, a special ceremony recognized the key figures whose dedication had created Palm Harbor's remarkable response to tragedy. Detective Walsh received a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work on cold cases. Dr. Maria Vasquez was honored for revolutionizing safety protocols in healthcare settings. The Rivera family received a standing ovation for their courage in channeling personal loss into public service. As Carmen approached the podium to accept the recognition, the assembled crowd fell silent. At 75, she moved more slowly than in years past, but her posture remained straight, her gaze direct. The journey from the devastated mother, waiting by the window, to this composed advocate for justice was written in every line of her face. 10 years ago, she began, my family stood in a courtroom and watched the man who took our daughter receive his sentence. We thought that moment would bring closure. What we've learned since is that closure is not a moment, but a process. One that continues to this day and will continue for the rest of our lives. She gestured to the crowded room, to the faces of law enforcement officers, medical professionals, educators, and advocates listening intently. What you see in Palm Harbor now, the programs, the center, the awareness, these weren't inevitable responses to tragedy. They required choices to channel grief into action, anger into protection, loss into legacy. Carmen paused, her eyes finding Miguel in his wheelchair in the front row, Daniel standing beside him with a supportive hand on his shoulder. My husband and I will never stop missing our daughter. That pain doesn't diminish, but alongside it, we've built a sense of purpose that makes the burden bearable. And in that purpose, we find Sophia's spirit still working in this world. As She concluded her remarks. Carmen shared the news that the Rivera family was establishing the Sofia Rivera Foundation, which would provide scholarships not only for nursing students, but also for those pursuing careers in forensic science, victim advocacy, and cold case investigation. The foundation's motto, she announced, is "From darkness, light," because that is what we choose every day. That is how we honor our daughter. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, with many in the audience wiping away tears. What they were applauding went beyond the specific initiatives Carmen had described. They were recognizing the profound human capacity to transform suffering into service, to refuse the path of bitterness when faced with unimaginable loss, to insist that evil would not have the final word. In the years following Sofia's disappearance, Palm Harbor had demonstrated that a community's response to tragedy could be defined not by fear or forgetfulness, but by a determined commitment to creating protection from similar harm. The town, once known only for a devastating cold case, had rewritten its story into one of innovation, vigilance, and healing. As the symposium concluded and participants returned to their communities across the country, they carried with them not just practical strategies and program models, but the powerful narrative of Palm Harbor's journey. That narrative would inspire similar transformations in towns and cities facing their own tragedies, creating ripples of positive change far beyond Florida's shores. For the Rivera family, the evening represented another milestone in their ongoing journey. Neither an ending nor a beginning, but a moment of reflection and recommitment to the path they had chosen. As they left the convention center together, arm in arm under a star-filled Florida sky, they carried Sofia with them not as a ghost of what had been lost, but as a guiding light illuminating what could still be created. In that way, the girl who had dreamed of healing others was indeed still doing so, through the hands and hearts of all those inspired by her story to build safer communities. Pursue justice, regardless of time past, and transform life's darkest moments into opportunities for profound service to others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.